This is Bob Wilson on Shake and Wake Radio. Welcome to I'm Looking Through You. We have a special guest today, Dr. Michael Marcades. Michael is an expert in so many different things, but you probably might know him for his written work, which he's going to tell us about. And he's also quite the musician. Welcome to the show, Michael. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Bob. Always good to be with you.
It's good to have you on. And just at the start, so everybody knows where to find it and about your work, could you please tell us about your book and the follow-up edition to it and how that came about?
Yes, in 2016, I was fortunate enough to be contacted by JFK Lancer regarding publishing what started out as an in-depth journal regarding all the mysteries surrounding my mother's life that actually turned into a full-fledged book. And fortunately, she read my work, wanted to publish it, and it was published in 2016, as I said. And a few years later, I even realized that 2016, after researching for about 30 years and writing for about 10 years, I was exhausted on many levels. But I knew I was going to have to come back to the subject. And a couple of years later, I had recuperated a little bit and delved into some missing links, some research that I had not gotten to regarding Rose Cherami's hospitalizations, which are very important to her complete story. And I published a second expanded edition through PNIL Unlimited, of course, called the same title, Rose Cherami, Gathering Fallen Petals, Revised Second Edition. And it's available, of course, it's available through Amazon, but if your listeners are interested in any kind of personalized copy, autographed, or a dedicatory page at the front for someone, they can contact me through rosecherami.com or PNIL Unlimited, PENIEL Unlimited.com.
Now we know where to find the book. Tell us a little more about your mom per se, and we can get into later how you got into the investigation end of it. But could you tell us a little bit about the background of your mom? A lot of listeners might be well versed in JFK, and a few might not be. So could you please tell us a bit about her?
Sure. Bob, are you interested in her connection directly to the JFK or her family narration prior to all of that, or growing up? What are you interested in?
Well, a mixture, because I think it plays into your life and faith walk, and also your personal story and the biography of your family ties into what happened later with JFK. So as you see fit, you could blend those two together and don't in any way feel constrained.
Okay, well, I'm sure that, like you said, most people who have been involved in any study or research related to the assassination, they know the snapshot of data that is connected to that subject matter. But everything that happened in my mother's life, prior to that, all contributed to her life dynamic at the time. She grew up as the middle child of three daughters to Tom and Minnie Bell Youngblood, who were tenant farmers of very low to moderate means in East Texas. Her family dynamic was exactly as you would expect in the 30s. Mother was born in 1923, and the way life occurred at home, my grandfather was very strict with his kids. It was not uncommon for parents at that time to kind of view their children as property, So I know my grandfather and grandmother to be people of, strong rules at the house, shall we say. And so I think they grew up under a pretty strict guideline. They were religious, if you will. They went to church, but the nature of their Christian lives certainly evolved over the next 20 or 30 years before I came onto the scene. Mother was a very precocious child. She had showed signs of real intellect and artistic talent, but she was somewhat of a hell raiser, even at a young age. She was pretty defiant, maybe because of the restrictions that she had at home. But by the time she was in her early teens, she had gotten to the point where she felt like she could do better in life on her own. So she ran away for the first time at the age of 14 and was discovered and returned home, but ran away again at the age of 16, which was pretty tough. That time it took. So she wound up being in the huge metropolis of Houston, Texas. Even then, it was a pretty large place, a pretty difficult place, certainly for a 16-year-old girl to make her own way. But she was there for quite a while. And as you know, Bob, from reading the book, that her story actually starts there. A lot of poor choices at that time, or at least difficult choices at that time in her life, that really impacted the next 30 years, 20 years of her life.
Now, most people would have first heard of this story from the beginning, or right after the start of the JFK film. So I wanted to get into some other things about your mom's life, which concern her health issues. But before we go there, it could be helpful to stop in and just as the JFK movie starts, we hear a warning coming from a woman in the hospital who had been thrown out of a car as the film depicted it. Right. And basically she was giving a warning about what was to come in Dealey Plaza. Could you talk about the way the movie presented it, that so many of us first became aware of the story from, and then perhaps the historical differences you've come to understand it and what happened in reality? Sure.
That's quite a lengthy narration. I'll try to break it up into pieces so your listeners can understand it all. Number one, the fact that Mother's character was included by Oliver Stone in his film is absolutely remarkable to me. Even to this day, I'm dumbfounded by the fact that out of all the characters surrounding the assassination, for him to elect to include her character is just overwhelming. It still is overwhelming. And I think at the time when they were producing the film, I believe Oliver Stone was surrounded by a number of people who were well versed in what they knew at the time about her life and her involvement with Jack Ruby, etc. They depicted things as accurately as they could at the time. And of course, part of that issue could have been the limitation of films. I mean, you can't have a 4-hour film. Mother's story could be a film on its own. But I think he included as carefully and as accurately what he knew at the time, of what researchers knew at the time, but some things that are implied in the film about her death or actually turn out to be not completely accurate, or at least it doesn't give the complete picture. But what he depicts about her speaking demonstrably about knowing about a team or an assassination team, or the fact that the president's life was indeed going to be threatened in Dallas, she did all she could to herald those facts. But the biggest issue with her speaking such was her ill repute nature and reputation. At the time, she was definitely a heroin addict. She had done hard time in prison. She had been arrested numerous other times for various offenses, including car theft, etc. She was, as I said, addicted to heroin. She was a professional prostitute, coordinator of prostitution rings for the mob, as coordinated by Jack Ruby and others. So most people thought at the time that she was just high on heroin, blabbing in withdrawal pains, and didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what she said at the time, of course, until after Kennedy was indeed murdered in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas.
And so the difference is basically from the film and what happened. Had your mother actually been thrown out of a car as the movie depicted?
To the best of my knowledge, and as a result of my over 3 decades of research, I'm sure at some point she was thrown out of a car in some given situation. But the Silver Slipper event, which I believe Mr. Stone was referring to, actually involved her being sideswiped by a vehicle on the highway outside of the Silver Slipper after she had been thrown out of the Silver Slipper, was stumbling down the road. She was struck by a vehicle. That man picks her up and takes her to a hospital because he realizes that she is in need of some kind of care for sure. But the scene of her being thrown out of a car and then seeing her lying by the side of the road facing directly into the camera, they imply parts of what I've discovered in research, but it doesn't really provide the observer with completely accurate information, in my humble opinion.
Now, as the movie was being assembled, I think Oliver Stone had done overall an excellent job. I know it inspired many people to think, to investigate further, to check facts. As well as you could put a film together, I think he did an excellent job. That
Yes.
having been said, do you wish before the film had, been in production and started, they had the script written? It seems strange to me, and I know there were a lot of people you had to get to, but the scene that affected you and your mother's scene with the car and such seemed to be, it sticks out in one's mind with the film. Do you wish he possibly had contacted you ahead of time? Could you have flushed the story out a little more and provided more detail had he done that?
Well, that's interesting that you asked that question. I certainly would have welcomed the contact, but to be perfectly honest, I was in many ways just beginning in-depth research at the time that JFK was produced. I believe it wasn't it 1995, Bob?
I think it was 1993 that it was released.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not sure what I could have revealed differently given the limited time that he referred to her in the film. Although, from my perspective, he devoted quite a bit of time at the beginning of the film to her. So it's kind of astounding to me. But I'm certain that they could have located should they been interested. I don't know why I was never contacted. I've always been curious. Who knows what the reason was?
Well, it just seems to me because it was such a big scene in the movie that courtesy should have been extended, especially since, actual names were used and such in the film. Other characters who I think they were afraid of lawsuits from, such as Ruth Payne,
Yes.
They changed their last name to Williams. But of course, the press that would come towards Miss Payne from the film wouldn't be favorable, whereas your mom was trying to basically stop the assassination. One person whose name jumped out at me and seems to have been a good guy was Francis Fruget. Now, he seems to have been an officer who was there as your mom was going through this the weekend, of the assassination and just before it. What can you tell us about Francis Fruget?
Well, Francis Fruget was at the very apex of what should I call it? Drug enforcement in the state of Louisiana. I mean, he was the top of the pyramid, so to speak, as far as the go-to person regarding anyone seriously involved with drugs, withdrawal, etc. I mean, he had just, dealt with hundreds of heroin addicts. So, I have such huge respect for what he brought to the situation, excuse me, at the time in the wake of the Silver Slipper and the following hospitalization situation. He devoted a lot of time to discovering the accuracy of the information that Mother was sharing. he actually, validated